Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about President Donald Trump and some of the major issues he's dealing with. Let's get back to our panel right now. Alberto, let me start with you. Let's talk about this. There's a strange new travel ban that's just been coming out of the Trump administration. Passengers on Middle Eastern airlines, we're told, who get onto flights, direct flights to the United States, can't take on board into the cabin things like Kindles and iPads and laptops and cameras and stuff like this. We are told that this is for security reasons. What are we to make of this?
Well, there are two things. The problem is that it comes from a controversial Trump administration, and the Trump environment has created this pool of suspicious and what some people are calling, especially from the left, bigotry through and prejudice through certain religions and cultures. However, I remember August 2006. When there was a U.S.-British uncovered plot with regards of liquids, and so it's been, what, 10 years now that we have had that ban on liquids because it was a real plot. So when you have this, I don't want to simplify it and going ideological, and because you hate Trump or you disagree with certain administration because of whatever stance on immigration and cultural issues. You should look at these things also from the perspective of intelligence. I am not an expert on intelligence. I have friends, but you know, when you have these things, normally there is some investigation behind it, and you have to be on the alert.
All right, Michael, what do you make of it? I mean, and talking about the broader travel ban as well, you know, that initial ban that Donald Trump announced against the nationals of 6 majority Muslim countries, that's now sitting in the courts, of course. It's been challenged. But does it make America a safer place?
Well, we don't know, do we? It's all about probability versus severity and calculating risk. And this wasn't different, the countries picked, than what Obama had picked. But again, we now have that entire political culture thrown out, and they're angry about it. So their political strategy is to throw every trash can in the path of Donald Trump and tie his legs together and then scream that he cannot walk. Now, as far as technology goes, quite frankly, technology is always a double-edged sword. And we have turned iPhones into powerful machines that 50 years ago would blow the minds away of technologists. And this gives access and power to very bad people. It is a very positive tool that is now being used in a very negative way. So, you know, get over it if this is where the terrorism is coming from, and this is what you have to give up to get access to these cultures that don't have these problems, because you really just have to follow the terror. And I think we've got a pretty good, clean line. If you want to just scream racism and isolation, you know, I ask them, well, you know, the United States is now requiring every citizen to go through unbelievable security just to get on a plane. So the incoming having to have their technology checked, you know, I'm sorry, but that's like guns in a way. These are weapons of communication to commit terrorist acts, and sadly, that is just a fact that we have to deal with.
Okay, Liling, I want to talk about another Trump policy now. This has nothing to do with travel, but this has got to do with the fact that Donald Trump is seeking huge cuts in the U.S. foreign aid budget, and these cuts include a huge reduction in the contributions that the United States makes to the UN. What's been the response at the UN to these proposals? And if these cuts are in fact implemented, how will it affect operations at the UN?
Well, Anand, the prospect of these cuts is, of course, very worrying for the United Nations. It would be very painful, especially where it comes to programs like peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and also climate change, which under that budget proposal, the U.S. Wants to eliminate payments to. So we're going to see a lot of this impact on a broad range of programs within the UN. Now, Africa will see the brunt of this of the hit, because that's where most humanitarian aid from the UN is distributed. That's where many countries are already seeing the impact from climate change, and that's where most UN peacekeeping missions are based. And the funding for peacekeeping is really quite at the center of this. The U.S. is paying, I believe, 28.5% of the total UN peacekeeping budget, something that the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has described as disproportionate. But let me put this into context for you. In the history of the United Nations, rich countries have historically paid the bill, and poorer countries have deployed troops, paid with soldiers. Which means that the U.S. has funded the bill, has been paying cash, while other nations pay with troops and lives. Now, just to give you a comparison, China is contributing about slightly more than 2,500 troops to UN missions, France 995, the U.S. only 32. So by cutting back on funding, a lot of these programs could end, a lot of them will be severely hit. But Anand, what makes this so interesting is that this could be a real game changer globally, because if the U.S. were to pull out funding from the United Nations, it leaves a void. And foreign policy experts and UN experts I've spoken to say that within the UN system, a lot of people are looking east towards China, for China to step in and fill this void. And that's not implausible, because China has been, in the past few years, increasing its investment in the UN via contributions of peacekeeping troops through humanitarian aid. So take it whichever way you want. Many experts here say the U.S. is shooting itself in its foot, but this also creates an opportunity for China.
Okay, Alexander, if we look at President Trump's outreach to the world, he's held meetings with a number of international leaders, with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, with the British Prime Minister Theresa May. There's a planned meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. But we've heard nothing so far about a possible meeting with President Putin.
Well, I think it's quite understandable that in the atmosphere in Washington, when the word Russia sent shivers down the spines of practically everyone in the media and, on television, on radio, everywhere, Russia is being portrayed like a bogeyman. I don't think that Trump, already having all these problems, that he would like to have more fire drawn to him, because if he starts, hinting that he's going to meet Putin and he wants to, build relations, you've seen that he's quietened down on Russia under this pressure. So I don't see any sort of reason why he would suddenly revive his interest in Russia. From the Russian side, this is a sort of a wait-and-see approach, because in a sense, in the Kremlin, they are bemused by what is happening. Not just in America, by the way, but in Britain and France and Germany and across the West, where, of course, Russia is portrayed as a nation, and Putin himself as a leader who can basically interfere anywhere he wants and get results done. From the point of view of domestic politics, I must tell you, Putin is riding high, because you can imagine when the Russian people are hearing from all over the world that the Russian leader can just give an order, and elections are influenced in major industrial powers, he gets quite a support in that, and he is looking at a re-election very soon next year. So for him, in a sense, this is a good campaign.
Alberto, another issue which seems to have gone off the radar a little bit, and that is immigration. We don't hear too much talk these days about that wall that's going to be built on the US-Mexico border, but the deportations continue. And in that respect, President Trump is following in the rich tradition of President Obama, who deported millions of people from this country. Where do you see this immigration thing going?
Well, look, I prefer to talk about the feelings of Putin and to put it in a geopolitical perspective, and the FBI talking about feelings of the president of a foreign nation is quite interesting. The immigration issue is going to be here because immigration and the United States are the same thing. Immigration is not a bunch of guys who come here illegally. That's just a minority of the issue. The issue is extremely strong, potent American issue, and it needs to be addressed not from an ideological perspective, but from a business and a nationalistic perspective. In that regard, Donald Trump should learn a little bit a better language to address the issue. I think the wall is going to be built by our own taxes. And when I say our, it means Americans' taxes.
But it will be built. Yeah.
I think he has to build something.
Okay.
You know, Bill Clinton built a little
Right.
bit. This president will build. What I look forward is to seeing in this country a national dialogue about the issue of immigration as an American issue.
Right, we've got a little time left. I want to go to Michael and get your take, Michael, on the possibility of a Trump-Putin meeting. Do you think that's going to happen anytime soon, or will it just be, or will the hysteria here in Washington go into overdrive?
Oh, I don't think he'll put gas on it. There's already enough gas as it is, and I don't think it's a good time for a serious one. I think that many people in the United States are using Russia as a scapegoat for their own political gains. That doesn't mean that Russia does not deserve criticism. The motivation for it is different, and by him bringing it into reality, I actually think would not be a service to him. I don't know if it'd be a service to Russia right now either. Because as your other guest had said, you know, Russia's actually kind of winning off of this, or Putin is specifically. But the immigration issue is interesting because that is really what singularly drove Donald Trump to the presidency. Because all this hysteria, it's like if you want to have immigration policy, it seems to be equated that you don't want an immigrant to come in. And all this is talking about is legality. And ironically, the behavior of Obama the last 2 years of his presidency, once he turned it into some sort of political issue, was very opposite than his first 6 years.
Right.
And it rallied people that didn't show up on the radar of the polls. And don't think Donald Trump doesn't know that, because that is the spine he needs to stay with, or else he'll get pummeled by everyone that's against him, because you've got the Washington establishment, the more moderate Republicans. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, and he's going to keep stirring that pot as long as he can, but he's not going to have Putin in D.C. anytime soon.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us.